a late autumn fog clung to the narrow streets of Greyhaven. A quiet English village where even whispers seemed to freeze in the air. At precisely 6:07, the town's tranquillity shattered. A single gunshot echoed from the grand yet decaying Rutherford Manor. Neighbours rushed to parted curtains, glimpsing only the faint glow of a chandelier and a silhouette falling. Within the hour, the body of Lord Arthur Rutherford lay in his study, door locked from the inside, windows bolted, pistol near his hand. Suicide, they murmured. Chapter 1. The Locked Study. A dense autumn fog rolled over the quiet parish of Greyhaven, clinging to the hedgerows like ghostly wool, and softening the outlines of the tall stoic houses that lined the lane. The night was unusually silent, too quiet for a village accustomed to the murmurs of passing travellers, the bark of restless dogs, or the distant creak of cartwheels. Even the crows, who typically perched on the skeletal branches of the old oaks, were absent, as though sensing an ill omen. The gas lamps, flickering weakly, cast uncertain halos of amber light along the cobblestone road leading to the looming silhouette of Rutherford Manor. The manor, ancient and formidable, rose from the fog like a memory, stately yet decayed, its once resplendent facade now mottled with years of rain, soot, and neglect. Inside, the corridors were dimly lit, save for the faint glow spilling from the crack beneath the study door. Lord Arthur Rutherford, master of the estate and the last heir of a dwindling aristocratic line, was known to take refuge in his study each evening. Tonight, however, an unsettling tension permeated the manor. Long before the dreadful noise pierced the quiet, the servants whispered of raised voices, low, heated, and abruptly cut short. But servants in old houses learn that silence is safer than curiosity. They said nothing, only exchanged knowing glances as they polished silver or tended to the hearth. Then, at precisely 6:07, a sound shattered the uneasy stillness, a gunshot, sharp and unyielding, slicing through the corridors with a cruelty that left no ambiguity. It echoed against the high ceilings, reverberating like a crack in the world's surface. A moment of stunned paralysis followed, then a flurry of action. Hurried footsteps, gasps, panicked voices rising in fragmented chorus. The household converged upon the source of the sound, the study door, locked from the inside. Lady Evelyn Rutherford arrived first, her usually composed face pale, her breath shallow. Behind her came Henry Caldwell, the secretary, his spectacles crooked as though he had flung them on in haste. Miss Clara Henshaw, the governess, hovered silently near the wall, one hand over her mouth. Julian Trask, the unexpected cousin visiting from overseas, pushed through the group with theatrical alarm. "Stand back," he declared as if expecting some dramatic confrontation behind the door. Yet no one moved. No one dared. After several frantic tries, the lock refused to yield. They forced the door open with a shoulder to the wood, Julian's shoulder, to be exact, and it splintered inward with an echoing crack. The tableau waiting on the other side froze them mid-breath. Lord Arthur Rutherford sat slumped in his velvet armchair, head tilted at an unnatural angle, a dark blossom of blood staining the right side of his temple. His hand, cold and limp, rested beside a polished pistol that glinted faintly in the lamplight. A few droplets of crimson had spattered across the Persian rug, but otherwise the room appeared disturbingly orderly, like a meticulously arranged stage set. The widow gave a strangled cry. Henry Caldwell staggered backward. Clara turned her face into her hands. Julian muttered a curse, though whether at fate or his own poor fortune was unclear. Within an hour, the authorities had been summoned. The village inspector, Chief Inspector Mallory, was a thick-set man with a disposition forged by years of dealing with drunken disturbances and disputes over pasture boundaries. The affairs of the aristocracy, however, were not his preferred territory. Nevertheless, he stepped into the study wearing the heavy air of assumed authority. "Locked room, weapon in hand, no sign of struggle," he concluded in a tone that suggested he hoped the matter would resolve itself quickly. "I'm afraid it appears to be suicide." Perhaps in another time, another circumstance, the village might have accepted such a tidy explanation, but not tonight. Not in this house. And certainly not by the man who now stood at the threshold, impeccably dressed, moustache immaculate, eyes sharp and glittering with intuition. Hercule Poirot entered Rutherford Manor silently, almost reverently. The fog from outside clung to his coat like a shawl of ghostly lace, but he removed it with deliberate elegance and handed it to a trembling footman. Poirot's presence altered the atmosphere. Something shifted. A ripple of unease, a sense that every detail, every breath, every fleck of dust now mattered. He approached the study without greeting the others, his gaze already accumulating information. "Pardon," he murmured softly in his lilting accent, "but may I?" Mallory cleared his throat, already annoyed. "Be my guest, Monsieur Poirot, though I doubt there's much here that requires your, special insight." Poirot did not respond. He stepped past him and bent over the body with the gentlest precision, his fingers hovering but never touching. His eyes traced the line of the wound, the position of the gun, the angle of the fallen arm. He noted the slight dust ring marking where the pistol had rested, not in the hand, but on the table beside the chair. It had been moved. He straightened slowly. "Inspector," Poirot said, "you are confident this is suicide?" Mallory bristled. Man alone in a locked room. Debts piling high. Estate. Failing. Yes, I'm confident. Poirot tapped the polished brass doorknob with a gloved finger. Tap, tap, before turning to survey the room. "There is dust disturbed here," he said, crouching before the threshold. "Yet your witnesses claim no one entered before forcing the door. And look here." He pointed to a faint scuff mark on the wooden floor. "Someone dragged something or someone before arranging this scene." Mallory scowled. "You're reading too much into it." Poirot smiled politely. "I never." He moved farther into the study. Bookshelves towered on 3 walls, crowded with volumes of history, finance, and a few rare first editions. A globe stood in the corner, its contents faded from sunlight. The large mahogany desk bore stacks of letters neatly arranged, too neatly, Poirot thought, as if placed after the fact. The fireplace emitted a faint warmth. Fresh ash lay in the grate, still smouldering. Something had been burned recently. Poirot approached the rug next, kneeling carefully to avoid disturbing its fibres. A tiny glimmer of red caught his eye. A thread of scarlet wool, no longer than a fingernail, wedged between the carpet and the floorboard. He pinched it with tweezers from his pocket and examined it with interest. "Curious," he murmured. "Something relevant?" Mallory asked impatiently. Poirot slipped the thread into a small envelope. "Something," he replied. "Everything, Inspector, is relevant." He approached the bookcase now, his gaze tracing the dust. A faint, nearly invisible line, no more than a disruption in the settled particles, suggested the bookcase had been moved, if only by inches. Poirot knelt again, and as he shifted a few volumes, he found what he suspected. A second hole, small and irregular, in the wall just behind. "Aha!" Mallory leaned over. "What on earth is that?" Poirot tapped the hole lightly. "A bullet hole, Inspector. The first shot fired in this room tonight." Mallory blinked. "But the victim was killed by a bullet from another gun entirely." Poirot finished. "The pistol by his hand has not been fired recently. Smell." He offered it. Mallory recoiled. Poirot turned to the household, who had gathered in the doorway, pale and wide-eyed. Lady Evelyn appeared one breath away from collapse, her hands trembling visibly. Henry Caldwell clutched the doorframe, knuckles white. Clara, silent as ever, clung to her shawl. Julian Trask paced like a caged wolf, back and forth, his eyes darting suspiciously. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. "This is not suicide," he said softly. "This is murder staged with meticulous care, but lacking the true finesse of the killer who believes themselves clever." The room stirred with whispers. Poirot continued, pacing slowly. "The door was locked, yes, but the dust tells me someone left the room after the deed, locking it behind them, and here." He pointed to the rug, again. A faint trail of displaced fibres suggests the murderer moved behind the bookcase, perhaps to retrieve or hide something. Julian scoffed loudly. "Hidden passages, really, Poirot? This is a family manor, not a child's adventure story." Poirot turned to him, expression serene. "It is always the old houses, monsieur, that hide the most secrets." Lady Evelyn finally found her voice. "Monsieur Poirot, my husband, Arthur, he was troubled, desperate. You must understand, this house, the debts—" Poirot raised a hand gently. "Madam, I am most sympathetic. But despair does not align the pistol at the perfect angle. Despair does not place the gun with such theatrical precision. Despair does not leave a bullet in the wall and a second firearm hidden in the shadows." Her eyes filled, though whether with grief or fear, he could not yet tell. Poirot returned to the body, leaning closer. "The wound is too clean, too perfect, and the gun, as I said, has not been fired tonight. No scent of cordite, no warmth in the metal." Mallory muttered, "So what are you saying?" Poirot stood. "I am saying, Inspector, that Lord Rutherford did not die by his own hand." Silence collapsed upon the room, heavy and suffocating. Poirot then gestured toward the painting above the fireplace, a portrait of the Rutherford family. The eyes of the painted Lord Rutherford seemed to follow the room with a knowing stare. Poirot, his voice low, added, "And I fear the killer stands among us now." A collective shudder moved through the group. Clara stepped back. Julian clenched his jaw. Henry wiped sweat from his brow. Lady Evelyn trembled, her lips parting as if to speak, yet she said nothing. Poirot turned once more toward the bookcase. His gloved fingers moved along the edges with slow precision until, click, a subtle shift. A narrow gap formed between the shelves and the wall, revealing the faint outline of a hidden mechanism. Poirot smiled thinly. "Ah, so the manor has more than one story to tell." He pressed inward and discovered a small recess behind the books. Inside lay a polished Renard 32 revolver, warm to the touch, recently discharged. Poirot withdrew it carefully. Mallory stared. "Good Lord," Poirot murmured. "Indeed, Inspector, but not good, not Lord. Murder." The household gasped as Poirot held the weapon delicately. "And now," he said, stepping aside as the fog from the window crept slowly into the study, "the investigation begins." Chapter 2. A House of Tension. The manor had grown colder in the hours since Lord Rutherford's body was discovered, as though the house itself recoiled from the violence committed within its walls. No one dared to return upstairs or scatter back to their daily routines. Instead, members of the household drifted like uneasy ghosts through the great hall, the dull glow of low-burning lamps casting restless shadows across the marble floor. The fog had thickened outside, sealing the manor from the world, wrapping it in a shroud of damp melancholy. It was as though the house, once a symbol of aristocratic pride, had become a brooding creature waiting for its secrets to be pried open. Poirot, after securing the study and ensuring the body would be guarded until the coroner's arrival, requested that everyone gather in the formal dining hall. The room, rarely used except for holidays or elaborate dinners, felt too grand for the sombre occasion. Crystal chandeliers shimmered faintly above the long mahogany table, their pendants tinkling like whispering glass whenever a draught crept through the hallway. Portraits of grim-faced Rutherfords stared down from the walls, their painted eyes accusing and aloof. The golden wallpaper, once resplendent, had faded into muted tones peeling slightly at the corners. Still, the grandeur lingered stubbornly, refusing to fully yield to decay. Lady Evelyn Rutherford sat at the head of the table. Her usual elegance, pearls perfectly aligned, posture regal, was shadowed by her trembling hands and hollow gaze. Her blonde hair, usually coiffed with immaculate care, fell slightly askew from the evening's chaos. Poirot took note not only of her appearance, but also of her restraint. She had not shed tears, not truly. Her eyes shone with the gloss of emotion, but no tears fell. A woman struck numb by shock, or a woman guarding her face too carefully? "Madame," Poirot said gently as he approached her, "you have endured a terrible night. If you need a moment—" "No," she whispered, the words sharp as glass. "Continue. We must not let uncertainty fester." Poirot bowed his head courteously, but observed her reaction with keen interest. Grief, in his experience, came in many forms: wailing, trembling, denial, fury. But silence. Silence could mean many things. Sometimes dignity, sometimes guilt. Henry Caldwell sat 3 seats down, wringing his hands with such fervour that his knuckles reddened. The bespectacled secretary looked utterly defeated. His thinning hair lay plastered against his forehead, a sheen of cold sweat making him appear feverish. Every few seconds he adjusted his glasses nervously, though they needed no adjustment. His eyes darted between Poirot and the empty seat opposite him, as if expecting Lord Rutherford to materialize and reprimand him for sitting in the wrong place. Miss Clara Henshaw sat stiffly at the far end of the table, her posture rigid as a statue carved from pale stone. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her knuckles white, her face drawn. Her dress, a modest grey gown, seemed to blend into the dim surroundings. She was a woman who preferred invisibility, who had built a life in the quiet service of others. Tonight, however, she seemed unable to fade into the background. Poirot could feel her eyes flicking about the room, tracking every breath, every tremor, as though she feared an unseen hand might reach. From the shadows, Julian Trask, in stark contrast, leaned casually in his chair, legs crossed, an expression of feigned calm plastered across his handsome face. His dark hair had a rebellious wave to it, and his clothing, meticulously tailored, hinted at vanity more than sophistication. But beneath the cultivated exterior was a restless tension. His fingers drummed the table's surface. His gaze kept darting toward Lady Evelyn with a peculiar intensity. That intensity told Poirot much more than Julian intended. Poirot stood at the head of the table, hands clasped lightly behind his back. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick, expectant, nearly unbearable. Then, clearing his throat softly, he addressed the group. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I thank you for gathering here despite the distress of this evening. You must understand, my questions may seem abrupt, perhaps even impolite, but time is the enemy of truth, and I must deal with each of you frankly and without delay." Julian snorted softly. Poirot ignored him. "First," he continued, "I must ask, Were any of you aware of Lord Rutherford's activities earlier this evening? Any visitors? Any unexpected correspondence? No one answered, not even a shift in posture. Only the crackle of the fireplace disturbed the silence. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Very well. Then I shall begin with what I have observed. He walked around the table, each footstep echoing in the cavernous hall. This house, he said, is filled with tension. Not merely the tension of grief, no. It is something deeper. Old resentments, secrets long unspoken, bonds strained, perhaps broken. Lady Evelyn looked away sharply. Henry swallowed convulsively. Clara's eyes glimmered with something akin to fear. Julian rested his chin upon his hand, as though settling in to enjoy a performance. Poirot stopped near the fireplace, turning to face them all. Someone in this house killed Lord Rutherford, or knows who did, and whoever that person is, they hoped to disguise their crime as a simple act of despair. But Hercule Poirot does not accept what is convenient. He accepts only what is true. Lady Evelyn let out a small gasp, almost inaudible. Caldwell sank deeper into his chair, shoulders hunched. Clara lowered her gaze. Julian raised an eyebrow as if amused. Poirot's gaze drifted over each suspect before settling on Henry Caldwell. Monsieur Caldwell, he said softly, you were Lord Rutherford's closest associate. You handled his financial affairs, did you not? Henry nodded shakily. Yes, for nearly a decade. And during that decade, Poirot continued, pacing closer, were there difficulties, arguments, disagreements over the handling of the estate? Henry flinched. Everyone knows the estate is in trouble, he said defensively. Lord Rutherford had been under tremendous stress. Poirot studied him closely. And you? Had you been under stress as well, monsieur? Perhaps more than you wished others to know? Henry's face went white. I don't know what you mean. Poirot did not press further. Not yet. Instead, he turned to Julian Trask, whose smirk had grown irritatingly self-assured. Ah, Monsieur Trask, Poirot said, the cousin from America. You arrived only last week, did you not? Julian inclined his head. That's correct. Arthur invited me to stay for a while. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Curious. It is not often that one invites a relative out of charity when one's estate is collapsing. What was the purpose of your visit? Julian shrugged, but it was too careless. Family bonding. Arthur and I had plans to discuss investments, perhaps. Investments, Poirot repeated. Or rescue. Were you, monsieur, in need of financial support? Julian's jaw tightened as he leaned back, crossing his arms. Everyone needs support from time to time. Poirot gave a slight nod, storing the revelation away. Indeed, and yet your cousin refused to fund you, no? Julian's eyes flashed. Who told you that? I observe, Poirot said simply. He then turned to Clara. Her hands trembled as she attempted to steady them. Mademoiselle Henshaw, he said gently, you were near the study before the shot. The servants saw you pass down the corridor 10 minutes before the gunfire. Why were you near the study at that time? Clara looked startled. I went to check on the children's lessons. I had left my teaching book near the library. Poirot leaned in slightly. But the library is west of the staircase, not at east, where the study lies. Clara froze. Lady Evelyn interjected sharply. Poirot! Leave her alone. Clara has served this family faithfully for years. Poirot turned his head. I do not doubt her loyalty, madame, but loyalty can drive someone to do many things, some noble, some not. Clara looked as though she might faint. Poirot moved away, allowing her a moment to breathe. He then approached Lady Evelyn with slow deliberation. Madame, he said softly, your husband struggles, both in financial matters and in matters of the heart. must have taken a toll on your marriage." Evelyn stiffened. "You presume too much." "No, madame, I presume nothing. I merely listen." Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your husband was planning something tonight. Something serious. Perhaps you knew." She turned away, her voice barely a whisper. "Arthur. Arthur was becoming impossible, suspicious, angry. He accused everyone of betrayal. He even accused me." "Of what?" Poirot asked quietly. But she did not answer. Instead, she pressed a trembling hand to her forehead, staring at the candlelight flickering across the polished table. Poirot straightened and addressed the room again. "There is more," he said. "Before entering the study, I heard voices from the direction of the conservatory. Urgent whispered voices. Someone in this house is afraid, not of the murderer, but of the truth." Julian scoffed loudly. "Voices! You think ghosts are plotting murder now?" Poirot ignored him and continued. "A pot was smashed in the conservatory. Someone attempted to hide something, or someone struggled there." Clara's breath hitched. Evelyn looked bewildered. Henry looked terrified. Julian looked irritated. Poirot's eyes glinted. "Secrets unravel," he said softly. "It is their nature." A sudden noise cut through the air. A sharp, brittle crack from the direction of the conservatory. Poirot's head jerked toward the sound. The others rose from their seats, faces pale. "What was that?" Clara whispered. Poirot held up a hand for silence. "A sign," he murmured. "A piece of the truth struggling to reveal itself." He stepped toward the doorway. And as the candles flickered violently in a sudden draught, as though the house itself exhaled, Poirot felt a shift, a subtle but undeniable awareness that someone among them was unraveling. The tension that filled the dining hall was no longer passive. It had become active, alive, charged with the fear of imminent exposure. Poirot paused, his silhouette framed by the doorway, and looked back at the frightened faces behind him. "Let us discover what the house wishes to tell us," he said. Then he walked toward the conservatory to confront whatever awaited him inside. Chapter 3. The Conservatory's Whisper. The conservatory at the far end of Rutherford Manor had always struck visitors as an oasis of warmth. A greenhouse of exotic blooms, fragrant herbs, and sunlight caught beneath a dome of glass. But tonight it felt nothing like an oasis. It felt like a cage. A shiver of cold anticipation seemed to clutch at Poirot's spine as he approached the archway leading into the room. Behind him, the others lingered at a cautious distance, unwilling to follow, yet unable to depart. Their silhouettes hovered in the corridor like a cluster of guilty shadows. Poirot stepped across the threshold. The moment he entered, the air changed. The scent of damp soil and wilting orchids mixed with something sharper, something metallic. A faint draught drifted through the broken pane of the glass dome, bringing with it an eerie whistle, a sound like a mournful sigh slipping through cracked lips. The lamplight from the hallway barely reached inside. The conservatory was cloaked in patchy darkness, illuminated only by the moon's pale glow filtering through fogged glass overhead. He paused. There, on the tiled floor, lay the remnants of a ceramic pot, shattered into jagged pieces. Soil and broken stems lay strewn in a half-circle, as if kicked during a struggle. Poirot leaned down, examining the debris. His fingers hovered centimeters above the soil, careful not to disturb anything yet. The door to the conservatory had been closed when he first approached, earlier, locked even. But now it stood slightly ajar, its hinges creaking gently from the subtle vibration of wind and tension inside the house. That alone spoke volumes. He rose slowly, scanning the room with sharp precision. "Mes amis," he called softly without turning, "I would prefer to examine this room alone, if you please." Silence. Then Lady Evelyn's voice, trembling, "Poirot, is it safe?" "For the truth, madame, it is necessary." He heard the shuffle of feet retreating, reluctantly. When he was sure they had withdrawn far enough, Poirot moved deeper into the room. Rows of potted plants cast long, spindly shadows across the floor, their silhouettes rippling in the moonlight like ghostly fingers reaching outward. A vine-covered statue of Athena stood in the centre, her stone face calm despite the disarray around her. Near the far edge of the room, an overturned stool lay on its side. Poirot made his way toward it, mindful of each footstep. There were faint grooves in the soil leading toward the statue, the marks of someone's heel being dragged. He crouched once more, examining the pattern. 2 pairs of feet, he murmured to himself, one firm, one desperate. He straightened and circled the statue. Behind it, partially concealed beneath a torn fern, was a small object glinting faintly in the weak moonlight. Poirot reached down and retrieved it, a silver cufflink, oval-shaped, engraved with a monogram. J.T. Poirot exhaled softly. Not in triumph, but in contemplation. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, "the cousin has been busy." But a cufflink alone did not convict a man, no. Poirot had learned long ago that evidence could be planted, stolen, dropped intentionally, or removed deliberately. The question was not merely who had lost it, but why it had been here at all. As he tucked the cufflink into his pocket, the faintest sound brushed his ear. A soft rustle. Not the wind, not the plants, something else, someone else. Poirot turned sharply, senses taut. "Who is there?" he called. No answer. He moved cautiously toward the back corner of the conservatory, where a curtain of heavy foliage hung in a dense, shadowed cluster. The rustling resumed, quieter this time, like the trembling breath of a frightened animal. Poirot reached out and gently parted the leaves. Miss Clara Henshaw stood behind them. Her face was as white as moonlit bone, and she clutched her hands so tightly to her chest that her knuckles bulged. Her eyes, wide and shimmering with fear, fixed on Poirot, as though he were the herald of her doom. "Miss Henshaw," Poirot said softly, "what are you doing here?" She nearly collapsed, her breath catching. I heard the noise, the pot. I thought perhaps someone was still in here." Her voice trembled, each word strained. "I came to see if one of the children—" Poirot stepped closer. "Mademoiselle, the children are asleep in their rooms. This room is no place for them. Please do not insult me with a lie so transparent." Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but she did not look away. Instead, she pressed her hands harder against her chest, as if trying to contain a heart ready to burst. She began, but the words died in her throat. Poirot did not force her. Instead, he reached gently to take her arm. She flinched, but did not pull away. "You are frightened," Poirot said, "but not of me. You are afraid of something you witnessed, or someone you recognized." Clara looked down at her trembling feet. "I didn't want to be here," she whispered. "I tried to stay away, but curiosity or fear drew you in," Poirot finished. Her nod was almost imperceptible. He guided her away from the foliage and toward a small bench near the center of the room. The air hummed with quiet dread as she sat, her back bent, hands clasped tightly on her lap. "Now then," Poirot said, crouching before her, "tell me what you know." Clara shook her head violently. No, I can't. I cannot betray—" She stopped abruptly, biting her lip. "Betray whom?" Poirot asked. She stared at him, terrified. Before she could speak, footsteps echoed down the corridor. rapid, purposeful, unmistakably masculine. Poirot rose sharply and stepped in front of Clara in a protective gesture just as the conservatory door swung fully open. Julian Trask stood there. His silhouette cut a striking figure against the faint hallway light. His jaw was set, his coat thrown over his shoulders with careless elegance. His eyes flickered briefly to Clara, just long enough for Poirot to catch the meaning behind the look. Recognition, annoyance, warning. "Ah," Julian said, stepping into the room. "Inspector, I thought perhaps you'd gotten lost in the jungle." Poirot's smile was mild. "Monsieur Trask, your humour is most unhelpful this evening." Julian's gaze drifted lazily around the room until it settled on the shattered pot. His expression was unreadable, too controlled. "Quite a mess," he observed. "Did someone have an accident?" "Accidents, monsieur," Poirot replied, "are rarely so symmetrical in their chaos." Julian's eyes narrowed. "Is that so?" Poirot stepped toward him, pulling the cufflink from his pocket and holding it between two fingers. "And an accident, I think, does not usually deposit a gentleman's cufflink beneath a fern." Julian's face hardened. For a split second, his composure cracked. A flicker of anger, no, of calculation, flashed in his eyes. "That's mine," he said. "Oui," Poirot replied. "So it appears. Would you care to explain how it found its way here?" Julian spread his hands. "Perhaps I dropped it yesterday. I walk through here often." Poirot tilted his head. "With your coat still on?" Julian hesitated. Poirot noted it carefully. When Julian finally spoke, his voice was smoother than silk but strained at the edges. "I came in this evening, before everything happened. Arthur and I argued earlier. I needed air." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Another argument? About what?" "Nothing that matters now," Julian muttered. "On the contrary," Poirot said, stepping forward. "It matters very much. You stood to inherit a sizable sum if Lord Rutherford were to die without updating his will. You needed money. He refused to give it. And now he is dead." Julian's jaw tightened. "Are you accusing me?" "I accuse no one," Poirot said calmly. "I ask questions, and I will continue to ask until I find the truth." Clara remained silent on the bench, trembling so violently that Poirot feared she might faint. Julian cast her another glance, sharp, threatening. "You shouldn't be here, Clara." She shrank back. Poirot stepped between them again. "Leave her be, unless you wish to appear even more suspicious." Julian's lips curled slightly, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned abruptly to leave. Poirot called after him. "Monsieur Trask, do not stray far. I shall require another conversation with you." Julian did not reply. The door slammed behind him. The conservatory fell into silence again, save for Clara's shallow breaths. Poirot returned to her side. "He frightened you," he said gently. Clara closed her eyes. "He frightens everyone." "Because he is dangerous?" Poirot pressed. "No," she whispered, "because he is desperate, and desperate men make terrible choices." Poirot nodded slowly. "Mademoiselle, you know something that weighs heavily upon your conscience. I cannot force you to give me the truth, but I can promise you this. The truth will come out, with or without your help, and if you remain silent, someone innocent may suffer." Clara's hands trembled anew. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, in a voice barely audible, she murmured, "I saw someone near the study tonight." Poirot leaned in. "Who?" Clara swallowed, her face crumpling. I cannot say yet, but I will tell you this much. Lord Rutherford was meeting someone. He wasn't alone when he died." Poirot stilled. "Who was with him?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. He thought he could trust them. Another pause, but he was wrong. Poirot stood slowly. The case, it seemed, was shifting, becoming darker, more complicated, more human. He looked once more around the conservatory. The shattered pot, the dragged footprints, the broken glass, the monogrammed cufflink. Pieces of a story waiting to be assembled. "Merci, mademoiselle," he said quietly. "You have helped more than you know." Clara buried her face in her hands, sobbing softly. Poirot placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder before leaving her to compose herself. As he stepped back into the corridor, the fog outside pressed harder against the windows. The manor groaned under the weight of its secrets, and somewhere distant, a clock struck midnight. Poirot paused, gazing down the darkened hallway. "One step closer," he murmured to himself. But toward what? Toward justice? Or toward something far more dangerous? The house seemed to whisper in response, its silence thicker than before. And Poirot walked on. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Study. The study had always been Lord Arthur Rutherford's inner sanctum, a private chamber of polished mahogany, aged books, and the lingering aroma of pipe tobacco. But tonight, as Hercule Poirot stepped inside, the room felt transformed. Not a sanctuary, but a stage. Not quiet, but echoing with invisible whispers. A banker's lamp burned weakly on the desk, casting an oval of green-tinted light that illuminated dust motes drifting like suspended secrets. Outside, thunder murmured along the horizon, dull and distant, as if reluctant to approach. Poirot paused at the centre of the room, letting his eyes adjust. He began with the obvious. Lord Rutherford's leather chair had been pushed back slightly from the desk, not violently, but not with the precision of its owner either. On the carpet beneath it were faint scuff marks, 2 arcs leading outward. Poirot bent to inspect them. The fibres were pressed down unevenly, the pattern interrupted halfway through, suggesting 2 movements, one deliberate, one hurried. A man rising from his seat, and then a second, perhaps a struggle, perhaps only tension. The desk itself, usually immaculate, bore signs of disturbance. Papers were fanned across the surface, not chaotically, but as if sifted through by someone with a little time and less patience. Poirot picked up one sheet, a letter stamped with the Rutherford family crest. It was addressed to Julian Trask. The ink was fresh, the signature incomplete. Poirot frowned. He read the first lines silently. "Julian, after our conversation, I must insist that tomorrow." The sentence ended abruptly, cut off by a jagged ink line trailing into nothing. Poirot set it aside, mentally cataloguing it. Evidence of unfinished business, perhaps of a confrontation delayed until too late. The fireplace drew his gaze next. Ashes lay scattered, not quite cold, faintly smouldering. Someone had burned documents here, and recently. Poirot retrieved his pocket tweezers and sifted delicately through the remnants. Most fragments were too charred to identify, but one thin strip of paper, curled like a dying leaf, still bore part of a word. Codic. A codicil. To a will. Poirot's eyebrows lifted. So Arthur Rutherford had intended to alter his estate. Such an act, in a family already strained by hidden motives, might well have been the spark that lit the powder. He moved next toward the windows. They were shut, though one latch hung loose, the brass scratched. Poirot touched it lightly. "Forced," he murmured. Not from outside, no. The markings were angled inward, suggesting someone had closed it in, haste or perhaps tried to ensure no sound escaped. The curtains billowed in a faint breeze, stirring like ghostly figures drifting in place. Poirot stepped back, allowing the room to speak to him in its own stillness. Someone was here, he whispered, and someone returned. He turned slowly, examining the bookshelves. One of the volumes, Meditations on the Modern Mind, was slightly out of alignment, its spine smudged. Poirot drew it out. A slip of paper fluttered free, landing silently at his feet. He stooped and retrieved it. It was a small portrait, Lady Evelyn and Lord Rutherford in their youth, standing arm in arm before the gates of the manor. But someone had folded the photograph sharply down the middle, bisecting their smiling faces. Poirot studied the crease. This was not an accident. This was deliberate. A symbolic gesture, a severing. Someone had wished to erase harmony, to rewrite a relationship as broken. He returned the photograph to the desk and turned his attention to the door. A faint scrape marked the wood near the handle. Poirot crouched. The scrape was shallow, uneven, made by something small. A ring, perhaps, or a key. He straightened slowly, thinking of Clara Henshaw's trembling hands, of Julian's narrowed eyes, of Evelyn's brittle composure. But Poirot was not done. He knelt once more by the base of the chair, scanning the carpet systematically. There, beneath the right leg, was a glint of colour, something tiny. He plucked it out and held it up to the lamplight. A bead, red round, and unmistakably part of Lady Evelyn's evening dress. Poirot closed his hand around it. "So," he said softly, "Madame Rutherford, you too have visited this room tonight." He rose and faced the desk again. A pattern was emerging, not a clear one yet, but the beginnings of a mosaic. Arthur had been burning a codicil. He had been writing a letter to Julian. He had met with someone he trusted. And then, in this very room, something had occurred that ended with his breath silenced forever. Poirot moved behind the desk and sat in Arthur's chair, mimicking the man's final moments. The chair creaked under his weight. The lamplight washed over the papers, over the cracked seal of the family crest, over the faint ash drifting in the hearth's last glow. Poirot lifted his gaze toward the door. "What did you see, mon ami?" he whispered, imagining Lord Rutherford alive for the briefest instant. "Whom did you welcome? Whom did you fear?" His eyes drifted to a faint smudge on the edge of the desk, fingerprints blurred. Poirot did not touch them, but he noted the height, the placement. Someone had leaned forward. Someone taller than Clara. Shorter than Julian. Perhaps Lady Evelyn. Perhaps someone else entirely. He rose from the chair. The room felt smaller now, more suffocating, as if walls were pressing inward. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment, letting his little grey cells sift through the observations, separating noise from truth. Julian had motive. Clara had fear. Evelyn had secrets. But none of this yet formed a complete picture. He stepped toward the doorway, pausing with his hand on the frame. The storm outside rumbled closer, and the manor groaned beneath wind and time. Poirot inhaled deeply. "Piece by piece," he murmured, "the truth reveals itself." As he turned to leave, something caught his eye. Something so small he might have missed it, if not for the reflection of the lamp upon polished wood. A silver chain, thin and delicate, lay partly hidden beneath the edge of the rug. He knelt and retrieved it. A locket. He opened it. Inside was a miniature portrait of Lord Rutherford. And opposite, in the second frame, one of Clara Henshaw, young, earnest, smiling shyly. Poirot closed the locket with a soft click. This was no mere keepsake. This was a confession of affection, a dangerous one. Poirot slipped the locket into his pocket and walked into the corridor, the shadows of the manor stretching before him like a labyrinth. The study had spoken, and the whispers it carried threatened to upend everything the household claimed to be. Chapter 5. Lady Evelyn's Uneasy Confession. The corridor outside the study stretched long and dim, lit only by scattered sconces, whose flames wavered like nervous candlelight. Poirot stepped quietly along the crimson runner, the weight of the locket in his pocket tugging at his thoughts. Each footstep echoed softly, as though the manor itself listened with bated breath. He had intended to return to his room to review his observations in solitude, but a sudden movement caught his peripheral vision. Lady Evelyn Rutherford, slipping swiftly into the small morning room at the corridor's end. Poirot hesitated. Evelyn had been composed earlier, too composed. But grief, like guilt, had a habit of shifting in the quiet hours of the night. He followed. When he reached the doorway, he found her standing before a tall window overlooking the gardens. Her hands rested on the sill, fingers trembling ever so slightly against the cool glass. The moonlight illuminated the delicate lines on her face, the weariness etched around her eyes. She did not turn as Poirot entered. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "it is late for solitary reflection." She closed her eyes before answering. "I cannot sleep, Monsieur Poirot. Not in this house. Not tonight." She drew a slow breath, her composure cracking. Poirot stepped forward, but not too close. Grief was a fragile thing. "You cared for him deeply," he said. Her hands tightened on the windowsill. "Arthur was not an easy man, but he was my husband, and now he is cold and gone, while his secrets linger like ghosts in every corner of this place." She turned at last, her gaze sharp but uncertain. "You have questions. I see it in your eyes." Poirot inclined his head. "Oui, madame, and perhaps you have answers." Evelyn moved toward a small chaise near the fireplace, settling onto it with a sigh that seemed to hollow her from within. Poirot remained standing. She studied him for a moment, her lips tightening at some internal struggle, before she finally spoke. "You must understand something about my husband," she began. "Arthur believed he could control the world by controlling the people within it. He made promises selectively, held affections sparingly, and used his wealth as both shield and weapon." Poirot folded his hands. "And yet, madame, many envied him." "Envy," she whispered, "was the root of his undoing." She lifted her eyes, meeting Poirot's steady gaze. He had planned to change his will. I discovered this only days ago. He meant to cut Julian out entirely. Poirot's expression softened. "And how did you learn this?" "I overheard them arguing," Evelyn admitted. "Arthur tried to be discreet, but Julian was furious. He accused Arthur of betrayal, of reneging on promises made years ago." Her voice lowered. "I feared what such anger might become." Poirot nodded slowly. "But there was more. He sensed it. And you, madame, what did you wish Arthur to do?" She looked away. "Arthur and I, we were not always aligned. I wished for peace in the household, for stability, but Arthur's decisions often fractured things." For a moment, silence settled between them like fine dust. Poirot considered his next words carefully. "Madame, earlier this evening, before the police arrived, were you in the study?" Her breath caught, sharp as a snapped string. "No. Why would you—" Poirot raised a single eyebrow. Her gaze faltered. "I only wanted to speak with him," she whispered. "Just speak. But when I approached the study, I heard voices. Arthur and someone else. Whose voice, madame?" She shook her head slowly. "I couldn't tell. It was low, tense. The door was closed. I didn't dare interrupt." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Did you see anyone leave?" A beat of hesitation, then yes. Poirot's pulse quickened, though his expression remained calm. Whom did you see?" Evelyn swallowed. "I saw Clara." The revelation hung in the air like a dropped crystal, shattering the quiet. Poirot said nothing for a long moment. The locket in his pocket felt suddenly heavier, a piece of truth bending under its own weight. Clara, sweet, frightened Clara, had been in the study, and she had lied, or rather concealed. Evelyn continued, her voice shaky. "Clara was coming out of the study. She seemed distressed. She hurried past me without meeting my eyes. I followed her, but she vanished into the east wing. I intended to ask her what had happened, but—" Her voice cracked. Then the scream came, and everything changed. Poirot absorbed her account silently. Clara's presence in the study aligned with the locket, aligned with her terror. But questions multiplied rather than diminished. Evelyn looked at him with anguished eyes. Do you believe Clara capable of such cruelty?" Poirot considered. "Belief does not solve murder, madame. Only truth does. And truth, like the dawn, cannot be rushed." He moved toward the fireplace, examining a small framed photo on the mantel. Arthur, Evelyn, Julian, Clara, and 2 servants, smiling, unsuspecting. A family portrait painted over fractures. "Tell me, madame," Poirot said, not turning, "does Clara's attachment to your husband trouble you?" Silence, then a quiet, restrained answer, "Yes." Poirot faced her again. "Did Arthur reciprocate?" Evelyn shut her eyes, pain flickering across her face. "Arthur enjoyed attention, but whether it meant anything, I cannot say. Perhaps Clara misunderstood gestures of kindness. Or perhaps Arthur, in his pride, encouraged it. I saw only glimpses. But jealousy?" She exhaled shakily. "Jealousy can twist a heart into strange shapes." Poirot stepped closer. "And yet you do not think she killed him?" Her eyes lifted, dark, worn, but certain. "I think Clara is weak, but killers are not weak. They are resolute." Poirot nodded slowly. He had seen both, the resolute and the desperate who killed out of panic. Clara fit neither entirely, which meant her role, whatever it was, lay somewhere in the shadows, half revealed, half hidden. He placed a gentle hand on Evelyn's shoulder. "Merci, madame. You have given me much to consider." As he turned to leave, she called softly, "Poirot!" He paused. "Find the truth," she whispered, "for Arthur's sake and for mine." Poirot inclined his head. "I shall, madame. That I promise." He stepped into the corridor, the door closing quietly behind him. The manor's silence wrapped around him once more, thick and watchful. Every room held a secret, every witness a fragment, and somewhere within these fragments was the thread that, once pulled, would unravel the entire tapestry. Poirot began walking toward the grand staircase. Tomorrow he would speak to Clara. Tomorrow the lies would begin to crack. The night, however, was far from over. Chapter 6. Clara's fractured truth. Morning came reluctantly to Rutherford Manor. A thin grey light crept through the corridors, washing the walls in a colourless pallor that did nothing to banish the night's tension. The storm had passed, but its chaos lingered. Branches littered the grounds, the fountain churned with muddy water, and the air felt heavy with expectation. Hercule Poirot descended the grand staircase with deliberate steps, his mind already turning toward Clara Henshaw. The young woman had become the fragile centre of several intersecting truths, and now it was time to pull gently but firmly on those threads. He found her in the East Wing sitting room, perched in a high-backed chair like a bird afraid to fly. She wore a simple morning dress, pale blue, her hair pulled back with noticeable haste. Her eyes, red-rimmed, tired, lifted as Poirot entered. A flicker of worry crossed her face, then resignation. Monsieur Poirot, she whispered, I suppose you're here for me. He closed the door behind him quietly and approached with calm precision. Oui, mademoiselle. I believe it is time we talked. Truthfully, thoroughly, and without interruption. Clara nodded, clasping her hands in her lap as if to keep them from trembling. Poirot took the seat opposite her. For a moment he allowed the silence to settle, inviting her to speak first, but she did not. She only stared at the small rug beneath her feet, as though hoping it might open and swallow her whole. I spoke with Lady Evelyn last night, Poirot began gently. She saw you leaving the study shortly before Lord Rutherford's death. Clara's breath hitched. I didn't mean I never wanted anyone to know. This is not about gossip, mademoiselle, Poirot said softly. This is about truth, and truth does not vanish simply because one hides from it. Clara pressed her lips together. A tear slipped down her cheek. I was there, but I swear to you, I didn't harm him. Poirot nodded. Tell me everything. She inhaled shakily, gathering courage. I went to the study because Lord Rutherford asked me to. He sent a note, just a few lines. He wanted to speak privately. I didn't think it was unusual. He often confided in me. She looked at Poirot with plaintive eyes. But when I arrived, he wasn't alone. Poirot leaned forward. Who was with him? Clara shook her head, frustration tightening her features. I only heard the voice. It was low, calm even, but firm. They were discussing the estate. Something about changes, about responsibilities shifting. Did Lord Rutherford sound afraid? Poirot asked. No, she said, not afraid, just weary, as though he'd battled this same argument for too long. She wiped her cheeks. I waited outside the door, uncertain whether to interrupt. Then the voices grew louder, not shouting, but strained. And suddenly I heard a chair scrape. I knocked, hard, but everything went silent. Poirot's expression sharpened, and then I pushed the door open slightly, just enough to see Lord Rutherford sitting at his desk, alone. She swallowed. The other person must have slipped out moments before. There's a back door to the study that leads toward the side corridor. I'm sure they used it. Poirot's mind catalogued this new detail instantly. A second exit, a perfect escape route. What did Lord Rutherford say to you? He asked. Clara hesitated. He seemed troubled. He told me he was making decisions that would anger people, that he hoped I would understand. Her hands twisted anxiously. I thought he meant Lady Evelyn, or Julian. I didn't ask. Poirot's gaze softened. Because you cared for him. A flush rose to her cheeks. I tried not to, truly, but he was kind, and I admired him. She looked away. That locket you found, I'm sure you know it was mine. Poirot nodded once. It was hidden beneath the rug in the study. I must have dropped it, she whispered. I didn't realize. I wore it every day, but last night I was so distressed. Poirot watched her carefully. Her confession matched the evidence. But there remained more, much more, beneath the surface. When you left the study, Poirot asked, was Lord Rutherford still alive? Yes, she said urgently. He was alive. He said he needed a moment alone. He asked me to leave through the back door to avoid being seen. Her tears returned, falling freely now. Oh, Monsieur Poirot, if I had stayed, perhaps he would still— Poirot raised a hand. Do not blame yourself for what you did not know. Continue. Clara wiped her eyes. I left through the side corridor and returned toward the east wing. I didn't see anyone else. Not then. She hesitated. But earlier in the day, before dinner, I did witness something strange. Poirot's eyes narrowed with interest. Go on." I saw Julian arguing with one of the servants near the greenhouse. He grabbed the man by the arm and spoke in a low, harsh voice. The servant looked terrified. When Julian saw me watching, he let go and walked off. She paused. Later, I asked the servant what had happened. He refused to speak. He just shook his head and looked at the ground. Another thread. Another knot in the tapestry. Poirot sat back, thinking. "Mademoiselle, you have withheld truths, not out of malice, I think, but out of fear." Clara bit her lip. Fear of hurting people. Fear of making things worse. "Yet secrets," Poirot said softly, "only grow heavier with silence." She looked at him with desperate eyes. "You believe me, don't you? You believe I would never harm him?" Poirot rose from his seat and approached her gently, placing a hand over hers. "Mademoiselle, I do not yet know everything, but this much is certain. Your story holds sincerity, and sincerity is a thing not easily forged." Clara let out a quivering sigh of relief. Poirot stepped away, his mind a whirl of careful deduction. Clara had provided crucial pieces. A mysterious visitor, a second exit, Julian's secret confrontation, and Lord Rutherford's final, cryptic warning. But still the picture was incomplete. He turned toward the door. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have given Poirot much to ponder." As he opened the door, Clara called softly after him, "Poirot!" He glanced back. Whoever was in that study with him, they didn't want to be seen. Poirot nodded gravely. "Non, mademoiselle, they did not." He stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. The truth was emerging, but like a figure through mist, its features remained blurred. And Poirot knew the next conversation must be with Julian Trask. It was time to confront the man whose anger burned brightest. Chapter 7. The heir's unsettling confession. Julian Trask was waiting for Poirot long before the detective reached him. He stood at the threshold of the billiard room. Arms crossed, posture stiff, jaw clenched. The morning sunlight slanted through the tall windows behind him, casting long shadows on the green felt tables and making him appear taller, sharper, harsher. His eyes, cold and grey like a winter sea, watched Poirot with a guarded tension that suggested he'd been anticipating this conversation with equal parts dread and defiance. "Detective," Julian said, his tone clipped, "I assume you're here to interrogate me." Poirot offered a polite nod as he stepped inside. "Interrogate? Non. Question? Oui. For questions, monsieur, are the lanterns that illuminate the truth." Julian scoffed. "A poetic way to say you doubt me." Poirot ignored the provocation and surveyed the room. The billiard cues rested neatly in their wooden stand. The chalk sat unused. A faint scent of cigars lingered, though none had been smoked recently. Everything was precisely aligned, except Julian, who radiated the restless energy of a storm barely held at bay. "Let us talk calmly, monsieur," Poirot said, "about the events of last night and earlier in the day." Julian stiffened. "What exactly do you think I've done?" Poirot fixed him with a steady gaze. "I know you argued with one of the servants, near the greenhouse." For a fleeting moment, Julian's expression twisted. Surprise, anger, then calculation. "Clara told you, didn't she? Of course she did." "Why is this a problem?" Poirot asked gently. "Unless there is more to the encounter than you wish to reveal." Julian paced away, running a hand through his hair, then turned back sharply. "It was nothing, a misunderstanding." Poirot lifted a brow. "A misunderstanding that involved you grabbing a man by the arm and speaking with such force that he appeared frightened." Julian crossed his arms again, posture defensive. He was a fool. He misplaced something Lord Rutherford had given him to deliver. What thing? Poirot pressed. There was a long pause. Then Julian exhaled heavily. A letter. Poirot stepped closer. A letter from Lord Rutherford? To whom? I don't know. Julian's voice tightened. The servant, Henry, claimed it was addressed to a solicitor in London. My uncle often sent documents to be reviewed or updated. I thought nothing of it at first. Poirot studied him. But Henry misplacing it angered you greatly. Julian's jaw flexed. He lied. At first he said he delivered it. But when I asked for confirmation from the courier log, nothing was recorded. The letter simply vanished. His eyes darkened. And the timing was suspicious. Poirot felt a ripple of interest. Suspicious how? It was the same day my uncle summoned me to the study. Julian's voice dropped to a sombre register. He told me he'd decided to amend his will. The air in the room seemed to still. Poirot did not blink. Amend it? In what way? Julian laughed bitterly. He didn't say. He only told me it would clarify matters and ensure the estate's future. He paused, swallowing. But he looked at me differently, measured, almost disappointed, as though he'd made a judgment but wouldn't explain it. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. And how did this make you feel, monsieur? Julian's composed facade cracked. How would you feel? My father ran this estate honourably. I've been preparing my whole life to follow him. And suddenly my uncle, who, forgive me, was not always the clearest man in his later years, decides to clarify matters without telling me why. Poirot remained silent, allowing the words to hang in the air. Julian took a ragged breath and moved to the window. The pale light illuminated the tension in his shoulders. I feared he might be removing me from inheritance, or reducing my role, or handing things over to someone entirely unqualified. Clara? Poirot asked quietly. Julian spun around. You think I believed she would inherit? Don't be absurd. But she was close to Lord Rutherford, Poirot observed. Julian hesitated. The reaction was small, but Poirot noticed. Finally, Julian spoke in a lower, more measured tone. He liked her, trusted her. She reminded him of my mother, he said. Julian's brows knit. But that doesn't make her an heir. Poirot tilted his head, unless Lord Rutherford had a reason beyond sentiment. Julian exhaled sharply. No, absolutely not. But the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes told another story. Poirot approached slowly. Monsieur, I must ask directly. Did you fear Lord Rutherford intended to disinherit you? Julian shot him a brittle look. Fear, yes, expect, no, but the idea unsettled me. Poirot nodded. So you confronted him? Julian stiffened again. Yes, after dinner. I asked if this rumoured amendment concerned me. His voice wavered at the memory. He avoided the question, said I would learn in due time, and then he dismissed me. Poirot raised both eyebrows. Dismissed you? Julian's voice dropped to a growl, like a child, as though I hadn't earned even a real explanation. His hands trembled slightly. Poirot saw it. And after this confrontation, Poirot asked, did you return to him later that night? Julian hesitated. Poirot watched him with calm intensity. Monsieur, the truth. Julian swallowed hard. Yes, I went back, but he was gone. Poirot stared. Gone? Not dead? Julian nodded. The study was empty, the fire was low, the lamp still on. His chair pushed back, as though he'd left in haste. Julian rubbed his forehead. I thought he'd gone for a walk, or perhaps to the conservatory. I searched, but I didn't find him. Poirot felt a slow shiver of revelation. Something here was terribly wrong, or terribly right. When exactly was this? He pressed. Around 9:30. Poirot's thoughts raced. Clara had entered the study shortly before 10. Lord Rutherford was alive then, which meant Julian's visit came earlier, leaving a gap the murderer had filled. Poirot studied the young man carefully. "Monsieur Trask, you must understand, withholding details only harms your position." Julian looked at him with a mixture of desperation and anger. "I'm telling you everything. I didn't kill my uncle. I was furious, yes, but I'm not a murderer." Poirot stepped closer, voice softening. "Anger alone is not proof of guilt, but your secrets, those can cast long shadows." Julian's expression deflated. "I know." For a long moment, the room fell silent, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Finally, Poirot said, "One more question. When you entered the study earlier, did you see 2 glasses on the desk?" Julian blinked. "2? No, only 1. Poirot's mind sharpened like a razor. Clara had heard a visitor. The second person had slipped away through the back door, and the glasses had been rearranged after Julian left, meaning someone else had come after, someone who had been in deep conflict with Lord Rutherford. Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Monsieur Trask. You have been of great assistance." Julian gave a hollow laugh. "I doubt that." Poirot turned toward the door. "You have illuminated more than you realize. And now," his eyes glinted, "it is time to revisit the servant Henry. Because a lost letter, a missing courier entry, a frightened man, and a secret amendment to a will. These were not coincidences. They were signposts, and Hercule Poirot was ready to follow everyone." Chapter 8. The Vanishing Letter. The servants' quarters lay in a quieter, more modest wing of Rutherford Manor, a place Poirot had not yet visited, but one he now approached with deliberate care. The corridor was narrow, lined with simple wooden doors and faintly scented with soap and laundry starch. The muted environment contrasted sharply with the tension knotting Poirot's thoughts. A missing letter, a frightened servant, and a mysterious amendment to Lord Rutherford's will. These elements had the feel of an invisible hand guiding events from behind a curtain. At the far end of the corridor, Henry stood beside a linen cart, folding towels with mechanical precision. He was young, perhaps 23, with sandy hair and eyes that darted nervously whenever footsteps echoed near him. The moment he saw Poirot approaching, his posture stiffened, and the towel in his hands fell forgotten to the floor. "Mr. Poirot," Henry stammered, "I wasn't expecting—" "No one expects Poirot," the detective said gently, "and yet when he arrives, it is always with purpose. May I?" He gestured toward the quiet room across the hall. Henry swallowed hard but nodded. Poirot led him inside, a modest space containing a cot, a small desk, and a narrow window that looked out toward the overgrown garden wall. The simplicity of the room made Henry's anxiety stand out, like a stain on white cloth. Poirot closed the door softly. "Henry, I understand you had a disagreement with Monsieur Julien yesterday." Henry's face drained of colour. "I swear, sir, I didn't mean any harm. I just made a mistake." Poirot folded his hands. "Let us speak clearly. A letter was entrusted to you by Lord Rutherford. A letter that was never delivered." Henry's breath came shallow. "Yes, sir, but I didn't lose it. Not exactly. I just found it gone." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Gone? Explain." Henry nodded rapidly, wringing his hands. "Lord Rutherford gave it to me in the afternoon. He told me to place it in the outgoing basket for the courier. I did. At least, I thought I did. But later, when Mr. Julian asked if I'd delivered it, I checked the basket, and the letter was missing." Poirot tilted his head, To be clear, you placed it in the basket, and someone removed it. Henry nodded miserably. Yes, I'm certain of it. Poirot stepped closer. Describe the envelope. Cream paper, Henry said quickly. Embossed seal. Addressed to a Mr. Lionel Hawksworth, solicitor, London. Poirot felt the spark of intrigue flare. A solicitor, of course. And were you aware of the contents? Poirot asked. Henry shook his head frantically. No, sir. I would never open the master's mail. But his voice cracked. I think someone else might have. Poirot's expression sharpened like a blade. Who? Henry's hands trembled. I don't know for certain, but I saw Lady Evelyn near the courier table earlier that day. She was holding something. When she noticed me, she tucked it behind her. Poirot's brows lifted. And did she appear flustered? Henry nodded. Yes, more than usual. She walked away quickly. Poirot considered this in silence. Lady Evelyn, whose marriage had been strained, who had resented Lord Rutherford's growing reliance on his secretary, who feared losing her position in the household, had been spotted near the very place the letter vanished. Why did you not tell Monsieur Julien this? Poirot asked softly. Henry's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Because Lady Evelyn scares me more than he does. Poirot blinked, surprised. Scares you? Henry nodded again, wringing his hands tighter. She has a way of saying things, quietly, coldly, as though she sees your mistakes before you make them. His voice faltered. I've heard her argue with Lord Rutherford before. She was angry more often than not. Poirot made mental note of every trembling word. Henry, listen closely. When Julian confronted you near the greenhouse, what exactly did he say? Henry swallowed. He asked if the letter had been delivered. I told him I'd put it in the basket. He didn't believe me. He grabbed my arm and said if I was lying, if I'd stolen something, he'd have me dismissed. Poirot shook his head slightly. And his temper frightened you enough that you chose silence over clarity. Henry nodded miserably. Poirot began pacing the small room. This letter is important, very important. Lord Rutherford intended to change his will. That letter likely contained details of this change. If someone intercepted it, their motive may not have been mere curiosity. It may have been self-preservation. Henry's eyes widened. You think someone here, someone in the house, stole it? Poirot stopped walking, turning to him with grave certainty. I do not think it, Henry. I am convinced of it. The young man shuddered. But who? Poirot gave a soft hum. Someone with much to lose. Someone who feared the contents of that letter. He paused, letting the implications sink into the quiet room. Henry, after the letter vanished, did anyone approach the courier station again? Henry blinked. Yes, late in the evening. Lady Evelyn returned. She placed something on the table, but only for a moment. Then she took it back. Poirot felt a slow, simmering interest. Describe her demeanour. Henry's voice shook, agitated. She kept glancing over her shoulder. Poirot pressed further. Could she have been attempting to return the lost letter? Or to destroy evidence of having taken it? Henry lowered his gaze. I don't know. Poirot breathed deeply. Henry, one last question. Did Lord Rutherford speak to you at any time after you received the letter? The young man hesitated. Yes, not long before dinner. He asked me quietly if I'd placed the envelope where he instructed. I told him I had. He nodded, but he looked disappointed. Or worried. Poirot stilled. Worried. Yes, Henry whispered, as though he already feared it was gone. Poirot left the room a few minutes later. Henry's anxiety still lingering like a draught behind him. The corridor seemed darker now, thick with secrets, thick with guilt. Poirot made his way toward the main hall, his mind churning through the revelations. A missing letter, a solicitor in London, a will amendment that would have shifted the balance of inheritance. Lady Evelyn near the courier table, Julian's growing panic, Clara's mysterious witness of a hidden visitor, pieces, all pieces, and the shape they were forming was far from comforting. Poirot paused at the foot of the staircase, placing one hand thoughtfully on the carved banister. Someone had stolen that letter. Someone who understood what it meant. Someone who needed to keep the truth buried. And Hercule Poirot, with every step, felt himself drawing closer to them. But now he knew exactly where to look next. The study, the place where truth had attempted to emerge, and where death had silenced it. Chapter 9. Shadows in the Study. The study loomed before Poirot like a sealed vault of untold truths. Morning light filtered through tall mullioned windows, casting long skeletal patterns across the Persian rug. The air felt stale, heavy with the remnants of fear, argument, and hurried footsteps. Poirot stepped inside with great care, as though re-entering a crime scene for the first time, not physically, but intellectually. Now that new threads had been revealed, every object, every shadow, every misaligned detail might shift in meaning. He closed the door softly behind him. Silence settled over the room like dust. Poirot walked to the desk, his eyes narrowing. It was as he remembered. Papers neatly arranged, the blotter smooth, the inkwell capped. Only one thing felt out of harmony. The faintest indentations on the surface, the ghost of a rectangle where something had rested recently. A letter, an envelope. He leaned closer. "Ah," he murmured, "you were here." But the letter itself remained missing. Poirot moved to the fireplace. The ashes had cooled overnight, leaving a grey mound that looked deceptively undisturbed. Yet he noticed something odd. The top layer was evenly spread, as though someone had sifted or smoothed it. And underneath, he saw the slightest discoloration. He lifted the poker and gently shifted the ashes. A scrap of charred paper peeked through, barely larger than the nail of his thumb. He used the tip of the poker to lift it free. The burnt fragment bore only one legible thing: the serifed tail of a capital letter, an L. Poirot stared at it mournfully. A single letter from a letter. "Someone destroyed evidence," he whispered. "Someone thorough." He crossed to the second exit, the discreet door on the west wall, the one Clara had mentioned. It blended nearly invisibly into the panelling, a secret known only to the household and those who wandered the manor often enough to learn its quirks. Poirot turned the brass knob. It opened easily. The corridor beyond was dim, empty, quiet, a perfect escape route. Poirot closed it again and returned to the desk. He placed one gloved fingertip against the mahogany surface, pressing lightly as if testing the pulse of the room. "Lord Rutherford," he murmured softly, "in your final hour you met someone who feared the truth you carried, someone who knew of the amendment to your will." He began pacing slowly, reconstructing the night's events. Julian visited early, angry, frustrated, but he left you alive. Poirot moved to the armchair, recreating the scene in his mind. He imagined Lord Rutherford sitting there, tired eyes fixed on the firelight. Then Clara arrives. You speak to her with reluctance, with resignation. You dismiss her, and you remain alive. Poirot closed his eyes seeing it. A man wrestling with decisions too heavy to bear. A man who had written his truth in ink earlier that afternoon, truth stolen, intercepted, and perhaps destroyed. And then, Poirot whispered, opening his eyes, the visitor arrives, the final visitor, the one Clara heard but did not see. He turned slowly toward the desk again. A faint smudge on the top edge of the blotter caught his attention. Poirot bent down. It was small but unmistakable. A trace of scented powder, fine, pearlescent, expensive, and familiar. Poirot straightened abruptly. "Lady Evelyn," he said softly, "you were here." He did not jump to conclusion. Poirot never leapt. But the evidence was gathering with a clarity impossible to ignore. He moved to Lord Rutherford's chair and knelt, examining the rug beneath it. He remembered finding Clara's locket there earlier. But now, with context, his eye noticed something else. A thread. A single silver thread caught between the rug fibres. Poirot pinched it delicately. Silk, high quality, from a garment cut for evening wear. Not Clara's, not Julian's, Lady Evelyn's gown. Poirot stood with deliberate slowness. And yet, he murmured, why hide these traces? Why smooth the ashes? Why remove the glass from the tray? He looked at the drinks trolley. Yesterday there had been 2 glasses. One used, one untouched. Now only one remained. Poirot stepped forward, bending to inspect the surface. Faint rings, 2 of them. One wiped almost clean, the other left plainly. 2 people drank here last night, Poirot whispered. One of them attempted to conceal that fact. The second person had not wanted their presence known. He took a step back, surveying the entire study like a stage. Props set, cues waiting, actors hidden behind curtains of guilt. Poirot's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Lady Evelyn, what drove you to steal the letter? Fear, desperation, or something far more dangerous?" He continued pacing, mind assembling the pieces like a mosaic. A stolen letter, a shredded will amendment, a secret meeting behind a closed door, a hurried exit through the west corridor, a clogged cascade of lies. But then Poirot stopped suddenly. There was something else. He approached the door Clara had used to enter the study, the main entrance. Its brass handle had been polished recently, but Poirot saw something curious near the keyhole. A faint black smudge. Ink, fresh ink. Poirot frowned. Why would ink be near the keyhole? Unless someone held papers while unlocking the door. Papers perhaps taken from Lord Rutherford's desk in haste. Papers that could not be left behind. Papers containing secrets too explosive to allow discovery. He knelt, examining the smudge more closely. The ink bore a slight violet undertone, the same shade used by Lord Rutherford's fountain pen. Poirot rose again, mind leaping forward with crisp certainty. The visitor left this room, carrying documents, he murmured. Documents they did not intend anyone to find. He stepped back to the desk. The inkwell was capped, the blotter clean. Everything placed precisely, too precisely. Lord Rutherford was a man of order, true, but this was the order of someone else. Someone who tied it in panic, not habit. Poirot placed his fingertips gently on the back of Lord Rutherford's chair. "This is not simply murder," he said quietly. "This is a man silenced for knowledge he intended to reveal." Poirot inhaled deeply, eyes drifting toward the window where sunlight thinned across the glass. He murmured to himself, "Who feared the truth?" Lady Evelyn, fearful of being cast aside. Julian, terrified of losing his inheritance. Clara, protective, emotional, vulnerable, but not violent. A hidden visitor, unknown, unseen, silent. Each suspect with pieces that fit, yet none complete. Poirot closed his eyes, summoning order from chaos. "There is one more place I must go," he whispered. One more person who may hold the key." His eyes opened with sharp resolve. "The solicitor, Mr. Hawksworth, the man who knew Lord Rutherford's intentions." Poirot stepped out of the study, closing the door gently behind him. The truth was coming, swiftly, inevitably, and someone in Rutherford Manor would soon find themselves standing at the edge of the precipice, one step from exposure. Chapter 10. The Unveiling of Truth. The late afternoon sun slanted through the grand windows of Rutherford Manor, painting the walls in gold and amber. Yet its warmth could not touch the chill that lingered over the household. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the drawing-room, his small grey cells humming with the satisfaction of inevitability. All the threads, painstakingly gathered from the study, the corridors, the servants' quarters, and the testimonies of those involved, had led him here. The suspects, Lady Evelyn, Julian Trask, Clara Henshaw, and the ever-frightened Henry, were assembled before him. A tense tableau of apprehension and curiosity. Each shifted uneasily under his piercing gaze. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. "The mystery of Lord Rutherford's demise has been troubling this house for days. Yet every detail, every scrap of evidence, every overlooked glance, every subtle gesture, has spoken to me in a language few can understand. Today, I shall translate it for you." He paused, allowing the room to inhale in unison. The servants' faces were pale, Julian's jaw tight, Lady Evelyn's expression unreadable, and Clara clinging nervously to her locket. "Let us begin with the missing letter," Poirot continued, "entrusted to young Henry, intended for Mr. Hawksworth, the solicitor. It contained details of Lord Rutherford's amendment to his will, a document with the power to change the destinies of those present. Who desired its contents? Who feared it? The evidence was subtle. Henry's testimony, Lady Evelyn's presence near the courier station, and the smudged ink on the study door. But truth is rarely found in a single action. It is woven, like threads in a tapestry." Lady Evelyn stiffened imperceptibly, though she made no comment. Julian shifted in his chair, eyebrows knitting. Poirot moved slowly, almost theatrically, pacing before the group. The sequence of the night is clear. Julian confronted Lord Rutherford earlier in the evening, leaving him alive, though anxious. Clara arrived next, unaware of the hidden visitor. She observed the voices, the tension, but did not interfere. Then, crucially, the final visitor entered, the person who removed the letter, smoothed the ashes, rearranged the papers, and left a faint trace of ink upon the door. He stopped and fixed Lady Evelyn with a sharp gaze. "Madam, your fear of losing influence, your desire to maintain position within the household, and your observation at the courier station, all pointed to your involvement. Yet mere motive is not enough for action. There is one further element, your silk thread in the study, the pearlescent powder upon the desk. These were the fingerprints of intent. You entered the study, retrieved the letter, and attempted to cover your tracks." Lady Evelyn's hands trembled, but she remained seated, her composure strained yet defiant. "Yes," she admitted softly, "I took the letter. I feared what would happen if Julian knew about the amendment. I did not mean to harm Arthur." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, your intention was not murder. But the unintended consequence of your interference created a chain of events that allowed someone else's impatience to turn fatal." He turned to Julian. "Monsieur Trask, your anger and fear were transparent. You believed your inheritance threatened, yet your visit left your uncle alive, unaware that someone else waited. Your hands were not stained with blood, though your motives were as volatile as the storm last night. Julian ran a hand through his hair, acknowledging the statement with a tight nod. Poirot's gaze then softened as it fell upon Clara. "And mademoiselle, you were the witness to both fear and secrecy. Your loyalty and affection were clear, yet you did not interfere. Your presence was crucial, for without your account of the visitor, the pattern could not have been reconstructed. You are not guilty, only entangled." Clara exhaled in relief, clutching the locket that had connected her to the study. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," she whispered. "I feared I had played a role in his death." Poirot shook his head gently. "You are far more innocent than you believe. Your honesty illuminates the path to truth." He turned back to Lady Evelyn. "And so, madame, we arrive at the pivotal moment. The one you feared most, Lord Rutherford, though already mortally wounded by natural causes. An undiagnosed heart condition exacerbated by the night's stress, succumbed not directly to your interference, but to the strain you and others imposed. Your act of seizing the letter created tension, the movement in the study, and the accidental misplacement of documents, all of which accelerated his demise. You are culpable in intent but not in murder." Lady Evelyn lowered her head, tears tracing her cheeks. "I only wanted to protect everyone," she murmured. "I never wanted him dead." Poirot moved toward the group, voice rising slightly, carrying the final clarity. "And thus we understand Lord Rutherford's death was the tragic convergence of fear, secrecy, and human emotion. Each person here contributed, some knowingly, some unknowingly. But it is the careful observation, the meticulous deduction, and the revelation of hidden truths that allow justice, understanding, and closure to prevail." He held up a gloved finger, emphasizing the last detail. "The missing letter will be recovered from the secret compartment in the courier chest. Its contents, amendments to the will clarify inheritance. Julian, you will understand your role and responsibilities. Clara, your integrity will be recognized. Lady Evelyn, your remorse must guide future conduct." A long silence followed, broken only by the grandfather clock's steady ticking. The household exhaled as though a weight had been lifted, each person processing the revelation, the interconnected actions, and the moral clarity that Poirot had brought to light. Poirot stood tall, adjusting his jacket, his small frame commanding authority with quiet elegance. "Mes amis," he said finally, "a murder, a secret, a stolen letter, and the shadow of fear. All of these tested my little grey cells. Yet, in the end, the truth emerges, not with noise, but with precision. The universe, for all its complexity, has order, and the order can be seen by those who are patient, observant, and courageous enough to confront reality." Lady Evelyn, Julian, and Clara looked at one another, the tension gradually giving way to reflection. Henry, standing quietly at the back, seemed almost to release the last of his fear, realizing he had played a part in revealing the chain of events rather than concealing it. Poirot's gaze swept over them one final time. "And so," he said, voice calm but resonant, "the matter is resolved. Let the past remain in memory, the lessons endured, and the truths never again be hidden in shadow." He turned to leave, glancing once more at the study where it all had begun. The room had surrendered its secrets, but the weight of human emotion lingered. Outside, the evening sun cast a warm glow across the manor gardens, the storm now a distant memory, leaving only clarity and the fragile peace of understanding. Poirot paused at the doorway. "Justice," he murmured softly, "is not always the punishment of the guilty, but the illumination of the truth. And in that light, every heart, every action, every secret finds its place." he stepped into the corridor, leaving the household to ponder, reflect, and finally heal. The case of Lord Arthur Rutherford was concluded. The truth, in all its complexity, had triumphed.